This is a refreshed Jeep Renegade Trailhawk. Is there a lot of potential in this small off-roader? Let's find out. The name Renegade first appeared on a Jeep in the early 1970s. It was a trim level on the CJ, the Wrangler's father. The Renegade returned in the mid-1990s for the YJ Wrangler trim. And then, in the early noughties, there was KJ Cherokee or Liberty, and it also had a Renegade trim. After the Cherokee, there was also the Renegade concept with a hybrid drivetrain. As of recent, several Jeeps are available as PHEVs, and in 2014 we got this, the Jeep Renegade BU, a small SUV made in cooperation with Fiat. Underneath, the Renegade shares a lot of components with the 500X. At first glance, it's hard to imagine what the boxy Jeep and sleek Fiat have in common, but if you look closely at the Jeep's signature grille, you'll quickly realize something's not right. A Jeep should have round headlights and a 7-slot grille. Okay, Jeep designers sometimes experiment with the headlights, but the 7-slot grille is what oatmeal is to Marriott. It's not negotiable. The Renegade has a 7-slot grille, but it's mostly fake. The real air intake is much lower. Why? Because the Fiat 500X has a lower rounded-off bonnet, and therefore the radiator needs to be lower. Since the two cars share the architecture, there was no point shifting things around under the Renegade's hood. But otherwise, most similarities between the Fiat 500X and the Jeep Renegade are invisible. Jeep style dominates in the cabin, high vertical console, a grab handle in front of the passenger, colorful accents around the speakers and the cup holders, there's a simple instrument cluster and a bunch of Jeep Easter eggs. The facelifted model no longer has the "Since 1941" sign over the infotainment screen, but there is now Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. There is no USB port under the armrest. Before the facelift, red line on the counter was marked with something that resembled a splash of mud. Now there are just orange stripes. The indicator stock in this test example works very hard when it comes to indicating, but the high beam is loose. As a result, on a number of occasions I flashed lights at some poor soul while leaving the roundabout. Also, once you turn the parking sensors off, they stay off until you deliberately turn them back on. I drove for a few days without parking sensors before I noticed. At least this time I noticed before hitting a wall, which happened in the Alfa Romeo Giulia. Back in 2015, I reviewed a front-wheel drive Renegade and an all-wheel drive 500X. After the facelift, Fiat's crossover lost all-wheel drive for good, but the Jeep can be ordered front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, although most engine variants are front-wheel drive only. But this is a Trailhawk model which not only gets all-wheel drive, but the better kind of all-wheel drive with simulated low range and rock crawl mode. The Trailhawk also gets better angles than the other Renegades. The approach, breakover and departure angles for the Trailhawk are 30, 34 and 24 degrees respectively, whereas the more city-oriented models get about 20, 25 and 21 degrees. The Trailhawk can wade in still water up to 48 centimeters deep, although in the manual it says if there is a current it's best to keep it down to 22 centimeters. The ground clearance is 21 centimeters, which is on par with the Volvo XC40. Before we get to the off-road stuff, let's talk about road handling. In 2015 I drove a front-wheel drive Limited. It was relatively comfortable on tarmac as long as you weren't going too fast. Above 100 km per hour it got loud inside, also thick A-pillars, limited visibility. 5 years later the Trailhawk is just as loud, or rather poorly soundproofed, and the A-pillars are still thick. Also, it makes sense to pump up your seat to see over the vertical dashboard, console and a flat bonnet. By the way, the seat and the steering wheel adjustment is very generous, especially for this segment. My only problem is the headrest angle. In order to look ahead rather than at the steering wheel, I have to tilt the backrest more than I would normally do. On the motorway, the Renegade is very sensitive to crosswinds. The lane keeping assist cannot keep up. On the other hand, on narrow country roads, where you may want to keep closer to the center of the road to avoid two wheels going off tarmac, the system sees lines even if there aren't any. But at least the suspension is good and it absorbs bumps well. This is an ideal car if you live in the country and sometimes you need to cover a few kilometers on a dirt road. This is where the all-wheel drive may come into play. Speaking of which, the Jeep Renegade can be ordered with either Active Drive 1 or Active Drive Low. Both automatically engage or disengage, as Jeep puts it, the rear wheels. Besides the automatic program, there is also snow, sand, mud and rock mode. The Active Drive Low in the Trailhawk also simulates low range by keeping the car in first gear. You can also engage permanent all-wheel drive, and there is a hill descent control system as well. How does it work in real life? The test Renegade is on Goodyear Vector 4 season tires. It almost got stuck in loose sand before I got to the main obstacle, which is a climb between the trees on sand and roots. I tested the Jeep Wrangler and the Land Rover Defender here. Predictably, the Renegade needed a bit more effort to drive up the hill than the two bigger off-roaders, and this root step proved to be an insurmountable obstacle. I made several attempts, but I couldn't get sufficient momentum. You can't turn traction control off completely. I know, hold the ESC off button for longer, but even that does not turn it off completely, so at times I would not even make it to the obstacle. And climbing over it was just out of the question. The Defender went up it like it wasn't there. I had to back out and take an easier parallel path. I don't want to say the Renegade is bad off-road, it's better than most crossovers this size. Also, there are many accessories for the Jeep, so giving your Renegade a lift, choosing tires with a more aggressive tread, or maybe reprogramming the traction control system should not be a problem. Let's get back on tarmac. I drove the Renegade for about 1,000 kilometers. Now, 1,660 kilograms and a boxy shape are no good as far as fuel economy is concerned, especially on motorways and dual carriageways. Jeep promises 6.3 liters per 100 kilometers combined for the 2-liter 170 horsepower diesel with a 9-speed automatic. As long as you're easy on the gas, keep it below 90 kilometers per hour, 7 is realistic. The faster you go, the more likely you're to hit about 8.5. The gearbox has so many gears, it sometimes gets lost. For example, as you slow down before a junction, you see the road is clear and you want to accelerate rather than slow down. Speaking of acceleration, Jeep claims this will do 0 to 100 km per hour in 8.9 seconds. I got 10 seconds, but for this sort of a car, the 80 to 120 km per hour time is more interesting because you may want to overtake once in a while. I got about 8 seconds. Just in case, make sure you check the speed limit yourself, because the traffic sign recognition remembers the last traffic sign, but without sat-nav, it doesn't know the speed limit is cancelled, say, after a junction. When getting in the back, make sure you or your kids don't step on this plastic sill protector. If you want to get up on the roof, step on the rear tire. In the back, there is sufficient legroom, a lot of headroom. There are door pockets for small bottles and pockets in the seats as well. There's an armrest with 2 cup holders, the best kind with rubber lining which adapts to different sizes of bottles and cans. There is 1 USB port, no AC vents. And why are the grab handles only in the front? Jeep says the boot volume is 351 liters without the optional spare tire, that is. The spare tire, if available on your market, costs about €270 and it takes up the underfloor storage, probably around 50 liters. To put it into perspective, in this configuration, 2 carry-on suitcases may be a problem because they may not fit next to one another or one on top of the other. You may have to remove the parcel shelf, which won't fit under the floor because of the spare tire, and it barely fits behind the seats, where it's likely to break sooner or later. It's as if someone designed the boot using external rather than internal dimensions. And I get it. You don't need an OEM spare because you'll lift the car and put some proper off-road tires on it and mount the spare on the tailgate like in a real Jeep. Prices of the Jeep Renegade start from what seems like a reasonable €21,000, less reasonable when you realize it's a front-wheel drive 120 horsepower 3-banger. The cheapest all-wheel drive costs 23 grand. It's either a 1.3 180 horsepower petrol with a 9-speed automatic or a 2-liter 140 horsepower diesel with a 6-speed manual, both in limited trim. There's also an active drive low limited with a 9-speed automatic for €33,600, also a 140 horsepower diesel, and finally the 170 horsepower 2-liter diesel with a 9-speed automatic active drive low Trailhawk for €36,600. With options, this car costs about €38,000. I found the first couple of hours behind the wheel of the Renegade challenging, to say the least. I even considered not making this review. I have no clue how Jeep manages to sell the Renegade as a lifestyle city crossover. The motorway is definitely not for this car, but soon enough I found myself in a place the Renegade was made for, the countryside. This is where the Renegade Trailhawk will shine even without modifications. And how do you like the refreshed Jeep Renegade? Would you like one to drive around the city, or perhaps the Trailhawk is more up your alley? Would you leave it stock or modify it? What modifications would you apply? Let me know in the comment section below. If you like my sarcastic, down-to-earth and possibly mildly amusing car reviews, join me every Friday. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.